So, guys, I want to talk about All Elite Wrestling, and Dave Meltzer is not happy with the Arlington show. So, what happened is that there's the Arlington Ep Sports Center, and what in Texas, and they're going to do multiple collision shows, and they're also going to do a Ring of Honor show there, Death Before Dishonor, and definitely, like in my opinion, that's both good and bad for AEW. I think that the good part about it is that obviously Fort Worth, Texas, and Dallas are very populated areas. Um, Obviously, if they actually want to be smart, the Von Erichs are very popular, so they can do a storyline with the Von Erichs and and have that lead to Death Before Dishonor, instead of doing something like, oh, we're in Texas, we're just featuring them, and we're not going to do anything with it. Make a story with the Von Erichs, and if they actually want to go on the road, you bring the Von Erichs on the road. You don't do something like, say, okay, Texas Von Erichs, let's just to have them, because they've done that a lot in Texas matches. In every Texas show, it seems like the Von Erichs appear. You have to do something with them, so it can inspire that. And then the other thing too is that it's just a lot cheaper to film in one area. Look at TNA Wrestling. They filmed in the Impact Zone. Like maybe over 90% of their shows was in the Impact Zone, if not more. When it was the Dixie Carter, when it was from the beginning all the way to when Hogan left the company. So I totally get that, and they do have to kind of budget cut a little bit because they're not being as successful, really. But I'm gonna read what Dave Meltzer wrote, and I am going to dissect it. And I definitely think there is a bunch of, I definitely think that there is a bunch of negatives with it as well. But I'm gonna go down to what Dave Meltzer says and see if I agree with it or not. All right. Dave Meltzer has urged caution over Tony Khan's decision to run the same building week after week and doubts ticket sales will remain strong for the shows, citing the history from WWE. Quote Dave Meltzer, they're going to sell tickets, but there's a limit. With the style of wrestling that you do today, and it's not about whether the booking's good or bad or whatever. It's just the nature of wrestling today and wrestling fandom and ticket prices today. You can't go back to the same city week after week after week. It does not work. In Mexico City, it works. We're not in Mexico City, but nowhere else. If WWE ran the same arena, granted 1993 was a really low point for WWE, but they started in Manhattan Center with Raw. They were going once a month. They were not going every week. The first time they sold out, and the second time they had maybe 800 people, and by whatever number it was, they were out there with 300 people and papering like crazy, and eventually had to move out because you can't run the same place over and over and draw people. Jacksonville was during the pandemic, but AEW in Jacksonville, when they were running every week because they had no other choice, but they were opening up ticket sales. They weren't getting a lot of ticket sales. They were running too often, essentially. The idea of going to Arlington, Texas every Saturday and one Thursday or Friday for a pay-per-view, you're lucky if you're going to get 1,000 people there by the third week. While Collision will take place in Arlington for the duration of the Summer Series, AEW Dynamite will be on the road at that time. The last sentence that I said was not something that Meltzer said, but I do kind of agree because one thing about wrestling is that you have to study history. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So obviously, as he said, that definitely it's shown that most of the time, if you do it, especially in the in the United States, if you go to the same city over and over, many people won't turn in, like the same way with WWE back in the '90s, because I think that there's people that will miss it. And there'll be people that are like, okay, you know what? When you go to a bunch of wrestling shows over and over, it just becomes monotonous. Like, I'll tell you this, that last year I think I went to like 15 AEW shows, and I remember like going to some events this year. I had to cut it down a little bit just because when you go to a bunch of wrestling shows, yes, it's expensive. Like a good like ringside seats for AEW. Sometimes you're lucky and can get it for $99. Sometimes you can get it for a few $100s, and sometimes you can get it for $2,000 to $3,000. The next thing is that if you want to get like a regular seats, you can spend up to $100, but it does add up. If you're going to do multiple shows, that's like maybe $1,000. I think that's still like 7 shows. You can spend up to $1,000 on the low end, and then you have Ring of Honor really, so it's like a 1,200 thing if you're really a fan of AEW. The other thing about it is that Collision is a filler show, and it's also like their B show. So the problem with Collision is you need to have some very compelling storylines. The problem with Collision is that you have Ring of Honor, and this would be a great opportunity to actually make Death Before Dishonor a big deal. But how many times have we seen AEW ruin the motherfucking bag when it comes to Ring of Honor? They don't have any compelling feuds. They don't market Ring of Honor that well, and they don't really have a goal to really prioritize Ring of Honor. You know, you paid over $20 million for this thing, and in WrestleMania country, you sold like 3,000 tickets, and you don't treat it like a big deal, like saying we should sell out because WWE's going to sell out WrestleMania and also the NXT show. So, you know, it's definitely concerning that you're going to have a Ring of Honor show, and God knows if Tony Khan's going to market it. God knows if Tony Khan's going to actually build feuds. God knows if Tony Khan's actually going to say we have to stop Collision and we have to go backstage and we have to reorganize and have a philosophy around Collision. It should be a mix of ROH and Collision, or you should do something like it's AEW Collision ROH, or AEW, we're getting rid of Collision, we're going to call it AEW ROH. And that'd be that really. That'd be that really. And then you have to figure out the identity really. And then also too, if you do Collision and you have ROH matches, if you have wrestlers like Max Caster or Anthony Bowens, or even like Darby Allin or a few other people that are really hot in AEW, you put them on the Death Before Dishonor show because that's going to help draw the audience. So I do think that that's one big thing about this. You have to make sure all the shows matter, there is compelling storylines, and that you have to say Death Before Dishonor, the goal is to sell it out and to make the best show possible. We need compelling stories. We need to do a mix of featuring wrestlers from our AEW roster that people want to see with Ring of Honor talent. We have to find Ring of Honor talent like Dalton Castle that's very, very charismatic, and that could be somebody in AEW and give them prominent matches. Or we need to take some talent like Keith Lee. I think it's Brian Lee, the cowboy guy, or the infantry, if I'm saying it right, who have great reactions. And we gotta like say, okay, well, it's gonna be the infantry versus the Young Bucks for the tag team titles, or we're going to have the infantry versus, the Undisputed Kingdom, and you're going to see Adam Cole there unannounced, on announced table. That's what you do, So I do think that that's the big issue, is that those have these shows, but it's probably going to be filler shows. And then why would people want to go there? And then also with Ring of Honor, since I've never seen them really make a big deal out of Ring of Honor, really, it's just going to be, just wrestling for the sake of wrestling instead of something very compelling. And as I said, if it's already nothing that compelling and you're going to overdo that monotony of not being really that compelling, yes, it's not going to draw really. And I think that, I don't remember WWE in 1993. I didn't watch wrestling until like the 2000s. But if I remember really quickly, I think 1993 WWE wasn't clicking for a couple of reasons. I think that's when Hogan and a couple of wrestlers were going to WCW. They were trying to transition out of the Hogan era with like all the old stars leaving or retiring. And they had a transition from, this is when Jerry Springer and other television shows were getting more popular. They had to realize that the family entertainment style is not working. They had to get more into the Attitude Era. And then also when you have new stars and new philosophies, it does take a long time for that to get over, in addition to a company that may want to stick with this image really. And with AEW, I think that they have a lot of those issues. I think that they don't connect with the audience because I think that their philosophy is really just really great matches. The second issue is that their philosophy is really not focusing on character and storyline, And their philosophy is that they have no divisions. For example, a lot of people are saying, well, Ospreay's going to wrestle for Swerve Strickland. Why is Ospreay wrestling Roderick Strong for the international title? I've said this millions of times. Darby Allin last year, he went from wrestling for the heavyweight title at Double or Nothing 2023 to talk about how the TNT title meant a lot to him, to talking about the tag team titles with Sting, and now he's back in a main event spot going after no title. But he and Swerve should have a match, at Wrestle Dream if you keep the title on him, on Swerve to that point really. So you have no division, so does get very confusing. And then also wrestlers get booked up and down the card really. You had Brian Cage in a main event spot. No, I think he was at the 9 o'clock spot, but he had a hell of a match with Swerve. But if you watch Collision, you're probably going to see Brian Cage maybe be a jobber again or something like that. So there's a lot of inconsistency. So I just think that with the product not emphasizing things that do work, compelling stories, wrestlers staying within certain divisions, leading up to your ROH Death Before Dishonor pay-per-view, again, it's going to be bad presentation, and then you're going to lose more and more viewers. I think that it's like a box office bomb. That's very clear with some movies that are box office bombs, that, there's issues with the movie, but you're going to keep showing that same movie over and over in the same area and expect to have a big box office / attendance at Death Before Dishonor, really. So I do agree that, AEW is not going to be successful with this unless they change their philosophy and approach, really. And I also just think that one of the big issues is that I don't feel AEW is goal-driven anymore. I think that's what's really hurting the company. So, so they really need to make the most out of it. Just tell a story, build more wrestlers, build up to your Ring of Honor show, and I think that they'll be successful. And I really don't think, AEW needs to look at their, they need to look at, their year into chapters. Like the beginning of the year should have been really about Sting's retirement, rebuilding AEW for Revolution. The second thing they should have done was say, okay, we're doing 3 big shows in April. So it's Supercard of Honor in WrestleMania country. It's making Swerve Strickland the champion in St. Louis, Missouri. It's also their Battle of the Belts show. And then the next part after that would be, okay, how are we going to make Double or Nothing, our anniversary show, a big deal? And now this is the Arlington, Texas era. We have all these shows in Arlington, Texas. We want a good box office. We need to kind of figure out the purpose of Collision and ROH, and we need to kind of make a banger out of that. And then after that era, it's going to be really about making sure Wembley Stadium doesn't have an embarrassing attendance. And then after that, it's really, the rest of the year from All Out all the way until World's End. And that World End, you had to kind of figure out, okay, what are we going to change? What are we going to set up for the following year, and keep doing that. So I really think with all these different chapters of 2024, I think Tony doesn't realize that. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I say I think that right now with him off television, he needs to go on vacation. He needs to go to Hawaii. He needs to go to Alaska. He needs to, go wherever, maybe Bangkok type of thing, really. He needs to really get some rest and recuperate. I think he's working himself to a bone, and he's spread himself too thin, and he's so busy that he can't really formulate what he's doing, really. This needs to be successful. This needs to be must-see television. This must be one of these things where people are like, you know what, in addition to going to the steakhouse and doing some square dance and listen to Toby Keith and watching Debbie Does Dallas, I want to actually go to watch all these events, really. And it has to be must-see, really, in order for it to draw. And I think that that's the big issue with all that. And I've explained why that's been an issue with AEW, really. So it definitely will be one of those things. I think it's going to save them money to be in the same arena. They're probably going to cut a good deal, but they're not going to do anything that's going to compel people to want to just, actually just be there over and over, really. So yeah, it's something really to worry about. And I do think Dave Meltzer is right. And I think that if it was a very compelling show, like you look at how WWE made themselves a really big deal. They had SmackDown, NXT in Philadelphia. They had WrestleMania Night 1 and WrestleMania Night 2. And then they had the Raw after WrestleMania. So they had 5 shows. And they also had a breakfast. And they also had other meet and greets. They did a really good profit in 5 shows in Philadelphia. But they did such a great job. They treated it like such a big deal to them. And I don't see AEW doing that in any regards. And obviously, they're not going to be big as WrestleMania, but you know, I see more budget cutting instead of actually making something out of this, and that's the issue.